It was the summer of 2014, and for my son's bar mitzvah present, just like many Jewish parents, we wanted him to bond with the Holy Land. Oh, it worked perhaps too well. My husband had stayed back at the hotel, and our friends, my son and I, had just stopped in a pharmacy.
Run to the bomb shelter, sweetie, please hurry. I didn't hear the sirens at first, but the Israelis did. They're used to hearing these things. We ran to the back of the storeroom. It was a 12-foot by 24-foot windowless bomb shelter. My heart's pounding. Boom! Boom! I hear it and feel the percussion of the exploding bombs. I'm trying not to get sick. I look at my 13-year-old son and I think I'll never forgive myself if something happens to him.
That's an excerpt from a speech I gave to the Orange County Jewish Bar Association. It was the first, but not the last time we had to run to a bomb shelter. Our adventure and my transformation is also the subject of my book, Blasted from Complacency, A Journey from Terror to Transformation in Israel. There is no chapter in a parenting book on what to do when a war starts and you're on a family vacation. Think touring extraordinary and sacred sites mixed with cowering in bomb shelters. I'm still trying to get over the Jewish guilt of taking my son to war for his bar mitzvah present. The impact of being human targets helped me understand the plight of Israelis living like this, and it also made me want to work on peace. How Israel is often described on the news is not what I'd seen with my own eyes. And I felt Palestinian parents also preferred their children playing safely in their backyards. The missiles exploded just near enough to blow apart my world as I knew it, forever changing me. And you'd never recognize my life today with what it was like then. I believe I found my life's purpose. Hello, I'm Penny St., and I'm the host of Peace with Penny. In today's episode, we will be speaking with an organization that works on peace between Israeli and Arab youth in Israel through tennis called Tennis for All. Jane Krivine is the founder and executive director of the Freddie Krivine Initiative, which administers Tennis for All. Today, we'll be speaking with her and their managing director, Lee Wilson. Formerly a UK concerts manager and arts festival director with 30 years experience in the classical music industry, Jane Krivine has been running the Freddie Krivine Foundation, the vision of her late father, Freddie, since 2005. Her father was known as Israel's Mr. Tennis. He was one of the 6 founder trustees of the Israel Tennis Centers. One of his passions also was to support tennis in the Arab sector by introducing tennis programs into the community. The Freddie Krivine Initiative strives to capture the imaginations of kids of all backgrounds and skill levels, bringing together a coexistence community of Arab and Jewish kids playing tennis together with the support from Arab and Jewish parents, coaches, players, teachers, and volunteers. So welcome, Jane and Lee.
Well, thank you very much.
I'm excited to have you. Excuse me, I wanted to begin with a clip.
בג'סר א-זרקא נמצאים כ-4,300 תלמידים, שבערך 70% מהתלמידים האלה נמצאים ומסומנים כנוער בסיכון. כל פעילות שתבוא לכאן לג'סר יכולה למנוע מהצעירים האלה לפנות לכל הגורמים השליליים, לכל התופעות השליליות.
Hello, I'm Jane. I'm Freddie's daughter, and I'm responsible for running the Freddie Krivine Foundation. When Freddie was the president of the Israel Tennis Association in the 1990s, he became aware of the fact there were so few Arab children playing tennis.
בגיל 10, טניס, הייתי בבית ספר עם מורה שלי, ומהיום שהיא לקחה אותי למגרשים ושיחקנו, אני עשיתי חלום מזה. העליות הראשונה מהכפר שלי זה קצת מפתיע את הכפר, כי אנחנו תמיד חיים במעגל שהילדה גודלת, ובאיזה גיל היא צריכה להתחתן, וזה החיים שלה.
Through the tennis, behavior has changed so much. Coming to the tennis has made them more calm. They are very determined to play, to be a big player one day.
לראות ילד כל יום משתפר צעד אחר צעד, זה משמח אותי וזה בעצם נותן לי את הכוח להמשיך.
בטניס אין אלימות, זה משחק שמחבט וכדור, ואחרי כל משחק אנחנו לוחצים יד, אם זה ערבי או יהודי אנחנו חייבים ללחוץ יד, אז אני חושבת שזה ממש דרך לשלום. מספיק שחבר'ה יהודים, ילדים קטנים, הם ערבים משחקים ביחד, זה התחלה של השלום לדעתי.
Hi, Jane. So would you like to talk a little bit about the clip?
About the clip. Yes, although that very much, we're going to divide. First of all, may I thank you very much indeed for inviting us today to participate in your podcast. We're very happy to be talking to you. This podcast finds Lee and I in a small community, really, a village called Binyamina, halfway between Tel Aviv and Haifa. And it's evening here, it's 9 o'clock. It's been a beautiful day in a very wet month. And we're very happy to have this opportunity to talk to you. Lee is the managing director of the program and has been for 3 years doing an excellent job. And I have sidestepped a little bit because I'm somewhat older and ready for retirement, and I'm more her assistant than her boss. But we work together as a team, and it'll give very much like to give Lee the opportunity to talk about where we are now and what we do. So you asked me now about this film, which we actually made 10 years ago. I look a bit younger there, I think. And this is the gentleman who was interviewed at the beginning of the program is Sheikh Murad. He's a sheikh and the mayor of Jisr al-Zarqa, which is a village which may not be known to your viewers, but they may know Caesarea, the famous now residential area, Caesarea, at one time a famous Roman port. And that is actually on the border of this very poor town of 15,000 people called Jisr al-Zarqa, Bridge over the Blue. And it is a town which has very serious social problems, a complicated history, and part of the community was actually a tribe from the Sudan, which was brought over in the 1880s by the representatives of Baron Rothschild. And he brought them over because these were people who were resistant to malaria. And they settled in this town, and they were joined by other farmers and peasants and workers from the neighboring area. So it's very much a mixed community. And if you were to go there, you would see people who look very, very much Sudanese, and you'd see people look very, very much Levant from Syria, Palestinian, Lebanese, Egyptian, the common link between all these communities. But they have serious social problems, a very low level of income, very high level of violence and drug taking. And in that sense, I'm sure not so dissimilar to many American cities as well, with the problems that come with poverty and a lack of work opportunity. So this is where we start work, because my father made Aliyah, that is, he came to live in Israel with my mother in 1984, and he was living in Caesarea, and he could see this village in the distance, this Arab village, and he was aware of the problems they had, and that's where the program began. And what you're seeing on the film, the program has been in action for about 10 years, and you see people with whom we're still very involved. including the young man, Mohammed Rashwan, who is our senior coach. He started tennis on my father's first program at the age of 8. He's 20 years later. He's 28 now. And he still works with us. And the two girls there are girls who are very typical of the kind of impact we have on the community. One girl is from Jis al-Zaka. The other girl is from a Bedouin town in the Galil. And she started tennis because of a project my father was running in the various villages in the Galil. Her teacher said, come on, there's a project. I want all you girls to take part in a tennis program today. Somebody's coming from Caesarea to set this up. We've got coaches. And that was her beginning of tennis. And that same girl, Bara, is now coaching tennis in the Israel Tennis Center in Tiberias. And the other girl, Ayat, has gone to college, has studied to be a teacher. And Mohammed is still with us. And the fourth person you saw was Chagit Fieldman, who is managing the program on the spot. She was a junior champion herself, and from Ashkelon, and she now lives in Caesarea, and she teaches, she works with us, and she's also a key element of our very small organization.
Oh, how wonderful. It's wonderful to see folks grow up over the years and be so productive. That is terrific. So you did obviously mention someone who is quite key to this, who was your dad. And would you talk to us a bit about him?
Yes, I'd love to do that. He's much missed. He died in 2005. His story is really interesting. He was born in Yorkshire in northern England, lived in a town called Harrogate, which was a very well-established middle-class town there. His father was in the textile industry. He was importing his textiles from Europe. He himself was an immigrant from a shtetl in Poland. He had a very thick Polish accent, and he was very old-fashioned in his views. But there was some problems with work at that point. This is 1920, 1922. And when my father was 2, my grandfather took the family to France, to another major textile center called Lille in northern France, where my father was brought up and educated in French until the age of 9. The family, by then 4 children, returned and went to England, went to London. And my father was educated in London at the Jewish Free School. I think at the time it was called the Jews Free School. He didn't excel himself in his studies, unfortunately. And when he was 15, his father was despairing of him and decided to pack him off to then Palestine, where we had family. We had relatives who'd immigrated directly from Poland and Russia in the mid-20s and had settled there. And they had told my grandfather of a fine agricultural school, which might suit my father very well. So he was put on a train in London, and on his own, at age 15, he traveled to Palestine. He arrived at the port of Haifa and enlisted in this school in a place called Pardes Chana. And I'd like to add here that if anybody is familiar with Pardes Chana in Israel, very near where I live, in between Haifa and Tel Aviv, there's the area of the school, which was an agricultural school, unfortunately is now a residential area, but they've kept the old gates of the school, the Pardes Chana Agricultural School, which my father attended for 2 years. And he then fell in love with the land, with the people. He made wonderful friends. But in 1938, he was 18 and he had to get to work, and he returned to England to start his career. Would you like to tell you a little bit more about what happened then?
Well, sure. But I next wanted to get into the whole discussion of bringing tennis to Israel, but he has had such an interesting life. So if you just tell us a bit more.
Sure. Well, he was sent to work for an uncle who was importing wood from Finland. This is towards the end of 1938, and as everybody knows, by September 1939, war had broken out. He was 19 years old, and he had to return to England, which he did through a complicated route because the borders were already closed. Then he managed to get to Sweden, and from Sweden he was repatriated by the British Embassy to London. He got to London and he was enlisted in a regiment, a horse regiment. Most extraordinary thing that they still had horse regiments there, but it was a combination of horse and artillery. And my father had hoped, I think, to join all his peers and his friends and his relatives of the same age and fight abroad, but it was not to be. He was trained on horseback, and he spent most of the war years guarding the king at Windsor Castle.
Oh my!
I think he felt that he never really fulfilled what could have been what should have been what he would have wanted to do. But he was a good horse rider, and in fact a good sportsman. And after the war, when he settled down, he started playing tennis informally with friends on the weekend at the local council-owned tennis courts. It wasn't a private club. It was a very unpretentious, regular match for him. He enjoyed it enormously. And of course, he had spent those years in Israel as a young man, and he loved the country very much. By that time, the country was now a state of its own. And his brother in 1952, his older brother David, went to live in Israel and actually became the economic editor of the Jerusalem Post. And people who read the Jerusalem Post 20 or 25 years ago may remember the name David Krivine. So my father used to go with my mother, and then later on, years later, with his children, to visit Israel. We went for the first time in 1961, and then again in 63. And then, of course, there was the Six-Day War. But during this time, he had good friends in Israel who he was friendly with at school, one of which, Memi de Shalit, had become the director of tourism in Israel. And my father, who by then was a regular tennis player, used to say to Memi de Shalit, "Memi, why is there no tennis in Israel? You've got the most wonderful climate. It's a perfect situation. You know, in England, it rains all the time. What about tennis here?" And Memi used to say, "Look, Freddie, you know, we haven't got the funds. There is no budget in the sports department in the culture, the Ministry of Sport. We know." He said, "What you should do, Freddie? You should come over here. You should do something. You should get involved." Well, this was early days. This was 1967, 68, and the only tennis courts in Israel at the time were tennis courts attached to the hotels. The Arcadia Hotel in Herzliya, which some of the listeners may remember, those who had been to Israel, and one or two other tennis courts, but it really wasn't a sport that people were engaged in. Over the years, there became more interest in tennis, and new immigrants came who were tennis players, and one or two clubs opened, and they even mustered a Davis Cup team. Davis Cup, I'm not sure if your listeners know, but it's the national tennis team. Each country fields a national tennis team, and they compete every year in the Davis Cup. And it's a very prestigious cup, and it's the only team tennis sport that we know of. It's an international teams tennis sport, and it brings together the top players playing with each other rather than against each other. So by which time I had come to live in Israel, and I was doing an ulpan in Arad, and my parents came to visit me, and they were staying at the Hilton Hotel, which some of you may know, in Tel Aviv, and they were in the elevator. We call that in England a lift. They were up in the elevator with a guy wearing whites and holding a tennis racket. And my father said, "Ah, you've been playing tennis?" And the guy, his name was Bill Lippy, Dr. Bill Lippy, said, "I have been playing tennis now, but my wife and I are going to watch the Davis Cup." My father said, "Davis Cup? We have a Davis Cup team." And Bill said, "Yes, we do." And so my father and mother joined Bill and Sandy Lippy, and off they went to the Davis Cup. And there was playing a young South African called Ian Froman. Ian is now one of the most respected people in Israel who had a wonderful history in tennis. But at that time, it was the very beginning of his career, and he was a young dentist, but his tennis was good enough to play for his country. He was an immigrant, and they were playing in Tel Aviv. Sometime later, my father met Ian and met Bill Lippy again, and he discovered that they were talking about the idea of creating a tennis center in Israel, a center where youngsters could come off the streets, they wouldn't have to pay, they'd be taught tennis. It would be a sport that could engage the interest of people who didn't have much else to do. It was still not as in a sports sense, there was very little going on in Israel at the time. And there was a lot of focus on security, and this was not high on the priority of the Israeli government at the time. So Bill, together with Ian and a few others, started thinking what they could possibly do to bring tennis to Israel. And at the time, Ian had been playing tournaments in the United States, and he'd come across these wonderful tennis centers, these tennis clubs that you have in America, where you have maybe 14, 16, 18 courts, beautifully laid out, beautifully managed. And he thought to himself, this is what we need in Israel. And he went back, and Bill, Ian, and my father, together with 3 other American businessmen, 1 doctor, 2 businessmen, joined forces, and they became the founder trustees of the Israel Tennis Centers.
Let me pull up their pictures.
Well, here's a picture.
Oh.
There they are, the 6 founder trustees of the Israel Tennis Centers. And then Bill
So
Lippy.
could you go across from left to right and tell us who they are?
Sure. So this is quite interesting. I hope I get them all correct. So far left is no, I've got to draw a blank on that one. Let me do the second one. The second left is Ian Froman, Dr. Ian Froman, who was the South African tennis player whose idea this was. Next to him on the right of Ian is another doctor, Harold Landsberg. The next to him is Ruby Josephs, who was a builder. And he was a very important element to all of this, because building, the experience of building, was vital for the creation of this program. Next to him is Dr. Bill Lippy, another doctor, and then my father. And on the far left, I'm really sorry, this is a real shame. I've just drawn a blank for a minute. I can't help you with that. It might come back to me.
It's okay. While you're talking, I do have them all written down, so I'll try to find that part and help you out. So go ahead.
Right. So this was an immense program. They first went to meet the mayor of Ramat HaSharon and told him what they had in mind. And he showed them strawberry fields stretching out as far as the eye could see, and say, well, this land is available. And that's the land they took. And that's on which they built their, I think it's 22 tennis courts and an absolutely magnificent 3,000-seater stadium, which is called the Canada Stadium, as it was funded by the Canadians. But the point of which is so important about this, it's not enough that these men should dream a dream. It's much more than that. They had to raise the funds. And this was the enormous battle they had. How and where were they going to raise funds for this, really, this idea, which was not medicine, it wasn't, helping young mothers, it wasn't an obvious target for fundraising. And they set up an amazing fundraising program with really innovative ideas, and it was the most enormous success as a result of their efforts and the efforts of people who became involved with them. They eventually paid for and built more than 15 tennis centers, the smallest of which is 8 courts and the largest is 28 courts. I mean, these are absolutely amazing centers all over Israel, as far north as Ramat HaSharon, as far south as Beersheba.
Awesome. So let me help you with the names. There was Ruby Josephs, there was Dr. Ian Froman, Harold Landsberg, Joe Shane, Dr. Bill Lippy, and Fred and your dad, Freddie Krivine.
It was Joe Shane.
There
Joe
you
Shane
go.
was right.
Okay,
Mm.
fantastic. That's an incredible accomplishment. So out of curiosity, did you have any top players come out of the tennis and education centers?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this was such a proof that you just need to have great coaches and a good structure to create great players. And the first generation of players who were probably in their 10 or 11 years old in probably 1981, 1982, were people like Shlomo Glickstein, Amos Mansdorf, a whole generation of really talented young players who went on to become top players at world level. They played US Open, they played Wimbledon, they were internationally ranked players, these young men. And part of the fundraising scheme that they use was they used to travel with these boys, these children, who were phenomenally talented, and go to visit people's homes all over the United States, Canada, Britain, France, Belgium, Switzerland, and they'd be hosted by people who might have owned their own tennis courts. A party would be given, the children would be put out on the courts, would excel themselves in exhibition matches, and then the fundraising would start. And all these gentlemen were terrific natural fundraisers. They were enthusiasts, they loved what they were doing. And these kids were absolute perfect examples of the success of the program. They weren't from well-off families. They didn't come from tennis backgrounds. They just had this opportunity to learn tennis, and they were being coached at a very high level.
Well, your father, as we've alluded to for sure, was just an amazing person, and I just amazed. But he was pretty much a feminist and promoted girls as well. Can you talk a bit about that?
Absolutely, because after these boys were making headway in the national forum, my father became more and more conscious that there was no interest in bringing the girls forward. I'm just going to.
Yes, your camera disappeared. There you are.
No, okay. Yes, there was. He could see that there were no girls in Israel being encouraged to play, and he was very concerned about this. I mean, it's a very interesting thing about girls. I'd like to interject here with something which many of your listeners may already know, but it's such interesting information. Women in tennis was not considered of any interest whatsoever anywhere in the world. We're not just talking about Israel. And when Billie Jean King was in her junior and early years as a top player, she was terrifically aware of the fact that tennis was controlled by men. And men weren't interested in the women. And not only that, they didn't even think the women were interesting to watch. So when they had big tournaments, whether it was Melbourne or Paris or London, the women were relegated to the outer courts. Because who's going to want to watch women? Nobody knew their names. They weren't familiar with them. It wasn't as exciting as the men. They just were present. Not only that, the men were earning 12 times as much in prize money than the women were. And Billie Jean King was saying, we girls have to have our own federation. We can't be pushed around by men like this. We can't be relegated to the outer courts and be paid this derisory prize money. And she got a group of women together. It's a famous story. It's been filmed. I hope perhaps one day you can watch it or you can screen it. A marvelous story.
I'm quite interested, because that is the time period that I grew up in the corporate world and went from clerk to supervisor to manager, etc. And I know what that was like. it was no different in the corporate world than it was in the tennis world. So I was cheering on as I was reading your history and loved the fact that you were raised by someone who with such forethought. But anyway, go ahead. It's an exciting story to me.
I'm just being disturbed. I'm disturbed. So I'm really sorry about that.
Well, your camera is there.
So
You
come
go.
on again. Right. So it's interesting. Another thing I just read today, that today for the first time Wimbledon, which is the British tennis, for the first time today it was announced that the price of tickets for women's matches will be the same as the price of tickets for men's matches. This is a 50-year story. This is a 50-year story of how really women it took a long time. So my father was very aware of the fact that Israel was terribly behind. They also were not backing the women. They didn't regard women as important. My father knew that if they would put money and backing behind the talented women, they would create champions. And he was so right, and nobody else believed it. He was right there at the beginning. He was committed. He raised funds in Britain, people who believed in him. As a result of his efforts, there was, for a period of 5 years, there were 3 Israeli women in the top 100 of the world. Even Britain
Wow.
never did that.
Wow.
They were
That's amazing.
Anna Smashnova, Shachar Pe'er, and Tzipi Obsila. And Tzipi Obsila, for instance, who was a perfect example of the prescience of my father, because she had financial difficulties, and when she was already on the circuit, and she said, I'm going to have to retire and go into coaching. I don't think I can do this. And this happened actually, she made this decision in the United States when she was playing the Federation Cup. That's the Women's Davis Cup. She was in the Israel Federation Cup team. They were playing in the United States. Billie Jean King was the captain of the United States team. And Billie said, how are you? I haven't seen you for ages. And Tzipi apparently said, well, I'm having a difficult time financially, and I'm going to go into coaching. And she said, Tzipi, that is disastrous. You're a wonderful player. You could have a great future. And she spoke to my dad and she said, Freddie, can't you help her? And that's how it all. So Tzipi had a wonderful career. She is, until today, the longest serving woman in the Federation Cup team. She's retired now, but she was.
How fabulous. And then your father also, just, I mean, reading his background is amazing, but at any rate, he also had a heart to help the Arabs and felt that they needed also to participate. So can you introduce us to that part of his story?
He had these very interesting years with the women, and he also was not of the Federation Cup team. He toured the world, and he was invited to become president of the Israel Tennis Association, which is the official body. And he enjoyed very much being president of the association. He gave prizes at the tournaments. He attended events, and it was something that gave him a lot of pleasure. And early on in his tenure as president, he was giving prizes at the national junior tournaments, the junior championships. And he, before he was about to present the prizes, he said to the director of the tournament, tell me, how many children did you have entering this year? Well, this is actually proof of the success of tennis in Israel, because by this time, there were 10, maybe 12 tennis centers all over the country. It was becoming a really dynamic sport. We had men and women in the world's top 100. And the guy said, it's been a great year. We had 600 entries. And my father thought for a second, and he didn't even know why he asked the question, but he said to him, how many of those children were Arab? And he was so shocked by the answer, he realized that his job now was to introduce tennis to the Arab community of Israel.
Wow. Wow. And quite a job he did, but you really took his dream and expanded it with the Freddie Krivine Initiative, initiative. And I'd really like to talk about your success and how you made that a reality.
Well, he'd already begun some programs very
Yeah.
early on. By 2000, he'd opened a Jewish Arab tennis program in Caesarea. There's a tennis club there, and they'd offer the courts for free. And he had two groups of kids, all 8 years old, 12 Jewish kids, 12 Arab kids. The Arab kids came from two villages, Faradis and Jisr Zarqa, and he raised funds to bus them over 2 or 3 times a week and get coached by a very talented coach called Danny Meda. And that was a program that ran and ran. He didn't replace each year. Instead of having more children join, it was always the same group. But this group had an immense impact on the children themselves. And when the children reached 18, when the Jewish children joined the army and the Arab children were then choosing their careers, 6 of them had the confidence to say, we want to continue our studies, we want to become professional. And 5 of them went and studied medicine at medical schools in Europe and are today doctors. One of them became a veterinary doctor, and he opened the first animal clinic in his village. And 2 became professional tennis coaches, one of whom you've already seen on the initial film, Mohammed Rashwan, and the other, Ibrahim Fahmawi, is employed very successfully at the Israel Tennis Center in Haifa.
Wow.
So that was how my father started.
This program has had such ramifications so far, even beyond tennis. It's amazing. It's a wonderful program.
You find that in your interviews with people, you know, it's as my father said, it's not really the tennis. You have to do. It's doing something. It's putting something into the lives of children, something that they can grab onto and gain from, whether it's sport or arts or science, something that they can emerge from the limitations of their lives, where their parents may not even be literate, to reaching a point where they know that this is theirs for the taking. And this was the beginning of a big program he set up with a number of different, all over the country actually, about that time, maybe 5 or 6 different programs, where he would have tennis coaches coaching children in the villages, in the communities. And that's where he was in 2003 when I came to live with him. I was semi-retired. I left my previous career in the classical music industry, and I'd come to live in Israel and settle down. And I helped him. I attended all the meetings with him. I wrote the minutes for his meetings. I made the tea when people came to visit him. And it was an enjoyable year, and I learned a bit, and I admired very much what he did. And he wasn't ill. He very quickly, her cold turned into pneumonia, and very sadly he died when I'd been there about a year. So I was in Israel for about a year, living here, and my Hebrew wasn't very good, and I really didn't have a career in tennis at all. I didn't know much about tennis, and I didn't know what to do, because we had money in the bank, we had a project going, we had a committee, a board, on which, as I think I've already described to you, we had the pleasure of having Ian Froman, who had decades of tennis experience. And we had a meeting, and I said, well, what do we do? And they said, we've got to go on. We can't stop. Let's go. We'll back you in any way you want. We're behind you. Let's go. And that's what happened. So from 2005 until today, I took the reins and did what I could.
Well, obviously, you've done an incredible job. One of the things I love is the motto that you have: children who play together learn to live together. And I think that's so important. Do you remember how you came up with that? That's such a wonderful, wonderful representation of what you do.
When I was in the United Kingdom, in London, I ran a PR company specializing in classical musicians. Our clients were big name recording artists. So I was always knocking out phrases that would, strap lines, that would carry some weight.
That's a great one. That's a great one because it's so representative of, You know, if we only meet each other, it's really what's needed. It's really what's needed.
Yeah.
So do you want to talk a bit more? Let me pull up your village. Now, seeing it on paper in English is a little challenging. Jizr Zarka. I'm sure I'm not pronouncing it correctly, but can we talk about that village because it's so important? I believe it represents so much of your program and how you've taken those kids and villages and really improved their lives far beyond tennis.
Right. Well, in a moment, I'd like very much to hand over to Lee, who is so active today in managing our programs. What I would like to say is just a little bit about what we're doing in Jisr al-Zarqa before Lee continues with this opportunity to tell you about what we do. And that is that, as I've described, it's a very impoverished village. It's got a very high rate of violence, drug taking. It's just an appalling situation, which a number of charities have tried over the years to make an impact. And it is indeed very difficult because it's a community which is rejected by the other Arab communities in the area. And they have a very specific problems of their own. But we were fortunate in having a use of 2 tennis courts in the neighboring Jewish community of Bet Hanania. We went to see them and we knew that they had 2 derelict tennis courts. And we said, look, if we were able to raise the funds to resurface these courts, would you let us use them for free as a center for the children from the local village, which was about 1.5 kilometers away, maybe 2 kilometers away, because it was a wonderful environment. It's a beautiful moshav, which is a community-run village, really. And it's an ideal environment. And they said, sure. We negotiated a contract with them, and we've had use for free of those courts since 2009. And we've been able to build up a really successful tennis school with children from Jisr al-Zarqa and also from the Jewish community of Bet Hanania. And in fact, we're about to resurface those courts in the next 2 or 3 weeks when it stops raining, and continue, I hope, for another 10, 12 years as we were. And this has become a center for us, not the only center, and it's not the only place where we work, but it is a key center for us. And we also, 2 years ago, started a homework club. And the reason we started a homework club is such an interesting thing, and I'm not sure people are aware of this. The Arab community of Israel are separately schooled. They go to different schools to the Jewish schools. They learn in their mother tongue, Arabic. They learn all their subjects in Arabic, and they only start learning Hebrew from the age of 9. That Hebrew is taught to them by Arab-speaking teachers. Now, something like 50% of the Arab community of Israel live in towns together with the Jewish community, whether it's Jerusalem or Ramleh or Beersheba or Haifa. But the other 50% live in villages which are closed off in every sense. They're not part of the Jewish community. The Jewish community is not part of their community. So the children really don't get a grasp of Hebrew in the way they might if they lived in the big cities. And we became very aware of this because we were meeting teenagers who couldn't keep a conversation going in Hebrew. They just couldn't do it. They couldn't understand simple instructions. They couldn't express themselves. And we saw a very real need to expose the children to Hebrew. And we have a wonderful team of volunteers who just chat with the children after their tennis lessons in our little tennis club by the tennis courts, so that they will hear the language, start to express themselves in the language, and feel comfortable in the language. Because how can they participate in the wider world if they don't speak the language of the country? The other area of expertise which we can add to this program is we have so many English speakers, including myself. So we have programs running parallel where the children will have an opportunity to speak English, practice their English with native English speakers, and practice their Hebrew with native Hebrew speakers. So that's the program of Giselle Zarka that we're now running, and that's a little description of the village.
That's fantastic. I mean, there's, like I said, your program really covers so many different areas beyond tennis that just help the two sides understand one another. So did you, Lee, want to come into this at this point?
Sure.
And can you talk a little bit about how you got involved?
Sure. I've been working, hi, Penny.
Hi.
Well, I've been working for many years in the non-profit sector in Israel, an activist sector in Israel. And in the past few years, I was working as a consultant for the New Israel Fund. The New Israel Fund would send me around the country to consult and teach small activist groups and new profits how to run a non-profit and how to become activists and how to fundraise and how to run their social media campaigns.
Boy, I could use you.
Yeah.
We'll have to talk offline.
Let's chat later. And that's the way I met Jane. And I was giving her some consultancy on her social media.
Yes.
And I was like, wow, I was so bowled over by her history of her father, by the work that she's put in, by the work that this program does, yet completely under the radar without people knowing that exists. They were so busy working, they didn't think that they need to actually market themselves so that people know that they exist. Unfortunately, with fundraising, it's a hard job out there to fundraise, and the best way really to fundraise is for people to know who you are, which is unfortunate because these small little non-profits put all their effort into running their programs and not marketing themselves, which takes a lot of effort. So I was consulting, giving some consulting to Jane about how to, market herself. And I was like, you need to be doing this, you need to be doing that. And then in the programs, you should be doing this, you should be doing that, and she's been doing this. And she's like, you know what? I'm not going to do it. I'm just not going to do it. You've just given me too many missions. I'm not going to do it. How about
not enough hours in the day?
Yeah, how about you come on and actually help me do it? And I just loved Jane so much, loved the nature, and I loved the project. I said, right, fine. So I'd love to, thank you. And I came on board a couple of years ago. And the first thing we did was create a new strategy, because they've been going for 20 years. And I think it's important for any nonprofit out there, always to reevaluate yourself. You can in the beginning set a certain mission. Maybe you've reached that mission. What do you want to do now? You may have set in the beginning what kind of impact, and times have changed or different things may have come up and you want to create a different impact. So it's always good to regroup and reevaluate and think, what is my nonprofit doing? Which direction am I going in? How would I like to proceed? Ideas with Jane. And then we decided to call the board meeting together. So we called a board meeting of the very illustrious members of the Freddie Krivine board, which is made up with unbelievably amazing people who knew Freddie, Ian Froman, who's been discussed here, past players, all on this fabulous board of the Freddie Krivine Initiative. So we got them all in the room. I was trying not to shake in my boots, meeting all these fabulous people. Yeah. And we presented them, our ideas of what we've done so far. A lot of times when you're working something, you don't really look back and say, wow, I did this and we did this and we managed to do that. And so presented them all their fabulous work in a little presentation, showing them, wow, you've done this and you've done that. And then we had a brainstorm. Now what? Where do we want to go? What do we want to do? One of the things that they had discussed is that they had overextended themselves. because so many people have heard about this wonderful program, been calling up and saying, can you set one up in my village? Can you set one up in my village? Can you set one up in my village? And they had just gone from the complete up north in the Galilee to the south in the Negev. They had programs running everywhere and coaches everywhere. And a lot of times when you're overstretched, you end up doing a lot of programs, but the impact is not as great as it could be if you were in a more concentrated focus. So we discussed what was Freddie's original vision and what is it that he really wanted to do, and did it match with what we wanted to do today, and basically came up with two ideas. The first idea was to consolidate all our activities into certain areas that we are the strongest at, and in those areas that most needed us, that maybe didn't have any other programs running, or didn't have the sports programs running, or didn't have girls empowerment program running, areas that would really need us and would appreciate the work that we're doing, and areas that we could expand easily in. So for example, if we were in a certain village and there are two other villages nearby, that's a great place. But if we're in one village and the other village is an hour drive away and our coach would have to drive an hour there, an hour back each time, then that would be more of a burden on us than it ease on us. So we remapped, we wrote together what we wanted to do when we came up with some ideas. So the first was the location and the areas, and the second was Freddie's real vision, apart from getting Arab children playing, was to get through tennis, Arab and Jewish kids meeting each other. So we decided to strategize, come up with a great 5-year plan of what we want to do, what kids we want meeting, and I can say 3 years down the line, we've had 3 years of amazing summer camps, Jewish and Arab kids and tennis summer camps, and this year we're twinning one of our programs with Arab villages with Jewish villages in the area, where we're going to have a year-long twinning program between the kids. It's going to be permanent stuff happening. And so it's great. You know, we just tried to regroup and rebuild.
Would you please explain what twinning is?
Twinning, great concept, is you get a club and another club, and you come together and you agree that we're going to twin for a year. And the twin for the year would mean, first of all, is we would market ourselves as twin together. So we would share and we would tell everybody that we're twin together through signs, through social media, through joint shirts, joint hats. So there's a branding of the two clubs as a twin partners in a program, so that everybody gets to know and think, wow, it's possible. Look, a Jewish club and an Arab club coming together, and they're
Fabulous.
Together, and they're partners. The idea is not to show that we're coming together, play and go home. Wow, Jews and Arabs can be partners and build something together. So that's pretty good. And the second thing is to have monthly activities throughout the year, where the two twin clubs would come together and have activities, whether it's playing tennis together, whether it's to celebrate Ramadan together or Hanukkah together, whether it's to get the parents to come for a Parents' Day and meet each other and play parents against kids.
Wow.
All those kinds of activities for a whole year, to have joint tennis-based activities between the children of the clubs and their immediate family members.
Love it. Love it. Being a parent, our trip to Israel that changed my life was a bar mitzvah trip. I took my son to war for his bar mitzvah present. It wasn't really what I initially intended. But one of the things of raising my kid I've always noted was, you know, you're going to be a parent and you have all these things that you want to teach your kid. But what's most been profound is actually what he's taught me, particularly about myself. So I love hearing how these children playing together have then influenced their parents to become involved. And can you say a little bit more about that? Those interactions must be really interesting.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because a lot of times parents are like, yeah, I'm really liberal. I'm going to send my kids off to, you know, meet Arab kids or, you know, get involved. But it's for the kids. It's not for
Right.
them, you know.
Right.
Kids, they need to be brought up different, and
Right.
suddenly they find themselves at Parents' Day and joint dinners, and suddenly they actually see their kids, and then, you know what? For my kids, it's completely natural. They don't
Of
see a
course.
difference. For
Right.
them, it's kids playing kids, and that's my friend. That, you
Mhm.
know, that when we play together doubles, we're great and we beat all the others. And suddenly
Mhm.
they realize how easy it is. And actually, all the stereotypes and all the problems are in the adults' heads. And it's the
Right.
kids that can lead the way and show us that it's, you know, what we should be doing. So that's what's really great about it.
On the pre-interview, I had to laugh about the Korean band. Just the whole thought of that. Can you talk a little bit about that, because it just cracked me up?
So we're always nervous about bringing kids together, because especially Jewish and Arab kids, apart from the usual stereotypes and the fears and everything, a lot of times with the kids coming together, they don't have the same language. As Jane mentioned earlier, they don't have the same language because Arab children learn Hebrew as a second language only from an older age, and Jewish children practically don't like Arabic at all. So it's really hard sometimes to bring these kids together. Sometimes the most common language is English, and sometimes more Hebrew, but you know, it's really hard. So that's why through play we bring them together. And one of the hardest things last summer is we have teenage girls, and full-on teenage girls camp. And if anybody's had teenage daughters will know how difficult it is to have teenage girls, a bunch of teenage girls from different paths coming together, a recipe for disaster. Most people try not to deal with those who are teenage girls, but we go in for it. We like to torture ourselves and go in for some accounts of teenage girls. And, you know, you're always nervous. So we came up with all these ideas, and we said maybe a good idea would be have a camp song. And on the first day, when all the girls come together, we'll say to them, let's play a song, and that will be a camp song. And every day when the girls come together in the morning, we'd all start off by singing the camp song. So in our minds, we came up with a song. Let's say, what about, you know, these peace songs, you know, like Shalom Salam. Let's do the, you know, as Madruchim, we were thinking of these songs. And then we said, you know what, let's ask the girls on the first day what songs we should play, and that can involve them in choosing the camp song. It's a good idea. So on the first day, we all get together and we explain to the kids we're going to choose a camp song. And we like play them all these peace songs, and they're just looking at us, you know, these peace songs from the 1970s, and they're just like looking at us with these faces. And then one of the girls says, can I put a song? And we're like, yes, of course, what song would you like? And then she goes and chooses one of these songs from the BTS band, which is a Korean, Southern Korean, very popular band amongst teenage girls. One of the Arab girls, she chose this song, she put it on, and of course we looked at each other going, don't be so silly. You know, we're not having a Korean song in Korean for our Jewish Arab summer camp. And then suddenly see all the Jewish girls know all the words, and all the Arab girls know all the words. And their first bonding experience was over this BTS song, which they all knew the words, they all loved, and they were like, you love it, so do I love it, you know. And they were all dancing to the song, and we were like, nothing like South Korean pop band to bring together Jewish and Arab teenage girls. So there you go.
That's great. I mean, you know, whatever it takes, for sure. For sure.
Totally.
I'm sure you went home singing the song.
Yeah, exactly. It gets stuck in your head in the end, doesn't it?
Yeah, all of these songs, you know, they start going and they'd never get off our track. That's fabulous. You also, I love the fact you even go younger with the mini tennis and get things going right off the bat. Can you talk a little bit about that program?
Well, I think Jane knows a bit more about the tennis because she knows a bit more about the actual professional side of the tennis bit. Do you want to explain a bit about how mini tennis works, Jane?
Yes, with pleasure. As it happens, it's not new anywhere in the world. All tennis clubs introduce the small children through mini tennis. They give them rackets which are the 23-inch, 25-inch, 27-inch, they're all smaller rackets than the adult rackets, and they have a lower net, and the net is mostly portable. So you set up the net on the court, and you can mark out with ribbon the side, so it's either a half size or a third size of a normal court, and then your children aged from 4, 5, 6 can start playing, and we'll have at the level, physical level, and strength of their ability, and then later they can be introduced to full-size court and the heavier balls, the faster balls. The balls are also softer in this. So this is, it's not an unusual thing anywhere in the world to start young children, but for us it's an enormous advantage, because it means we can take these mini tennis kits, these portable kits, onto a playground, a car park, a stretch of road in any village, and bring the children in, mark it out with the ribbons, give them all the tennis rackets and the softer balls, and from the off they can start hitting the ball across a net to each other. And that is the introduction to tennis.
But this is also in Arab villages.
Yes, we've been taking them into Arab villages for more than 20 years.
So that was really the the thought behind what I was saying, that
Yes.
that you're starting young, you're starting blending the communities working together, and the benefits of that are enormous, obviously.
I wonder if I can ask Lee to talk a little bit about the Arab community of Israel on a scale.
Sure. I mean, just on a general basis, the Arab community in Israel makes up of almost 25% of Israel, made up of various different religions, different communities, whether it's Bedouin or Druze. Israel is completely open inside Israel, inside the Green Line, to equal opportunities for Arab citizens. So equal access to education, equal access to jobs, equal access to everything. The problem is, a lot of times, a lot of these Arab communities are living in small villages that are cut off from access to these equal opportunities, or even just cultural differences create problems in accessing these equal opportunities. So a girl who maybe has grown up in her village and has never left her village her entire life, or has only left the village to go to another Arab village, would not necessarily feel confident enough, for example, to go to university in Tel Aviv, where if she did go to university in Tel Aviv, she could be accepted just as anyone else and study as anyone else. And in fact, the rule in Israel is the first year that you're in university, you can write all your papers in your mother tongue language in order to assist people whose mother tongue language isn't yet up to this level of Hebrew. But just having the confidence of being able to go into that university setting is what sometimes holds back a lot of people. So this situation is something that we try to work on with our sports programs, because the sports programs is not necessarily just bringing Jewish and Arab children together, because obviously bringing them together will get them more to get used to being in situations with each other, but it's also to give confidence to these Arab children, especially Arab girls, to go out into the world and leave their village and have the confidence of going into interviews for higher education, interviews for jobs, for even dreaming beyond what they're used to be dreaming, and think it is possible to do things. And if it's possible to turn up to a program and play tennis twice weekly, and if it's possible to speak with one of our volunteers and within a year be speaking English or Hebrew with one of our volunteers, if it's possible to come to a summer camp for a whole week and make best friends with a Jewish girl, suddenly their eyes open, that they say, wait a second, I have lots of possibilities open to me now. and they're not so scary. You know, I managed to do this, this, and this, and this. The rest of it doesn't seem so scary. And that's why Jane's programs have had such a remarkable effect on children that now, after 20 years, we're seeing the fruits of those programs. Only 22% of the children in the villages we work from actually graduate from school with any kind of matriculation, and which is such a low number. But the kids we work with, we have a high percentage rate of the kids that have been through our programs year after year, finishing school, going on to higher education, as Jane said, even becoming doctors and coaches. We actually have a training program for children who've gone through our programs. By the time they get to 16, we can send them off and we cover the costs. We have a scholarship program where we go and send them off to become coaches, professional coaches, to train to become professional coaches in tennis. And then they come back, and as a return for their scholarship, they intern in our programs as coaches. And this gives them a profession wow. That outside of their village. So it's a real great program that the impact is for long-term impact.
Fabulous, really fabulous. The ramifications of your program are just immense. For our last question, I wanted to ask, how what do you see for your programs as far as growing in the next 5 years? What directions are you looking to expand in?
Well, you know, the first things first is just recently in May 2021, there was an outbreak of conflict with Gaza, and this led to an internal conflict in Israel, with a lot of Arab and Jewish young men in particular on the streets fighting each other. In fact, in the areas we work in, on the main roads, there was lots of young men on the roads throwing stones and stuff at each other. And this scared people. This scared a lot of people in the country, starting to say, what is going on? And a lot of people reached out to us and said, we want to become part of your projects. And this, in fact, had a complete, it was one of the stepping stones for creating this twinning program that we discussed earlier, because we started to do some community programs between different communities, and this has grown into the twinning program. So what we would like to see is more of this community twinning of, you know, Arab and Jewish villages coming together through tennis, and coming together and matching and twinning with each other and putting on the table partnerships for long-term programs. And in fact, we've created more meetings coming up just this week with different mayors of different cities to see how we can expand these twinning programs. So the one thing is to expand intercommunal activities. The second thing that we'd like to see is to really expand our clubs into, before Corona, we had 4 clubs running. At the moment, we've got 2. So we'd like to get the other 2 back up running. Now we're hoping that Corona is going to come down a bit, with this Omicron. Hopefully it will be. And then after those 4 clubs are set up properly in 4 different villages, really to expand out of there, but not running off to the north and running down to the south, but from each club going to satellite areas around that main club and expanding that way. And that's how we see our work really taking part. And of course, doing the day-to-day, getting those kids out there playing away from the TV screens, a racket in their hands, playing on the courts, taking them out for exciting activities is what we do a lot of the time, and getting them to meet Jewish and Arab kids together through the tennis.
Really fantastic. Really fantastic in so many ways. You know, there was so much to talk about. We didn't talk about how healthy it is and so on, but we all know that. Thank you so much, both Jane and Lee. And Jane, I'm sure your father would be very proud of how you carried his dream forward to make it a reality. And It was fantastic. In Tuesday's episode, we'll be speaking with Elhanan Miller, a rabbi, Jerusalem journalist, researcher, and the creator of the online initiative People of the Book. Its goal is to introduce basic concepts in Jewish faith to Muslim audiences and vice versa. Through a series of innovative animated videos and one-on-one interfaith conversations, People of the Book hopes to foster mutual understanding between Jews and Muslims and contribute to grassroots peace building. Peace in the Middle East is contingent upon better understanding of each other's religious and cultural backgrounds. A better understanding of Judaism can soften the animosity many Arabs in the region feel towards Jews and Israelis acquiescing to Jewish existence in the land. Similarly, a better understanding of Islam can help Jewish Israelis understand Muslim sensitivities concerning holy sites and other points of conflict. Very little information exists in Arabic about Jews and Judaism, and People of the Book bridges the gap for both the Arab world in Arabic and Islam in Hebrew for the Jewish Israeli audience. I hope you can join Rabbi Elhanan Miller and me. Come learn about People of the Book and their efforts towards peace, beginning through understanding one another's religions and cultures. If you have a scheduling conflict, you can always see the recordings on my website at penny.tee.com under podcasts. Thank you, and may you live in peace, shalom, and salam.